Past 1 a.m., the hallway outside 218 sweats like stone after rain. My keys rattle in my pocket. The exit light hums. I'm checking the fire door when the peephole on 218 fogs from the outside, a white bloom that spreads, then clears. 3 polite taps follow, knuckle soft. I put my ear to the wood and hear a low whistle, an old tune, the kind you hum when you're working with both hands. Cold air slides under the door and chills my ankles. Maintenance, I say, but my voice sounds swallowed. My toolbox, not touching it, scrapes 3 inches across the carpet and stops with the handle turned toward me. Dust shakes out of the doorframe like something heavy just stepped back. I look through the peephole. The stairwell is empty, the pull chain light swaying a little, though there's no breeze. Then the whistle moves, past the door, up the wall, across the ceiling, like a man climbing where there's nothing to hold. I flip the latch and open 218 inches. The gap breathes out quarry cold and the faint smell of wet mortar. The whistle stops. For a second, the peephole fogs again from inside. I close the door. When I turn to walk, I see them on the back of the wood, where my hand just was. 5 chalky fingerprints pressed deep, upside down, as if someone standing on the ceiling had braced there to let me pass. That was 3 months ago. Now I know better than to answer knocks after midnight. My name's Ezra Tillman, and 6 months back I was installing gutters on ranch houses outside Little Rock, making decent money until the housing market took a dive steeper than the Buffalo River Rapids. When work dried up, I heard about this caretaker position through my cousin Dewey, who knew a guy whose sister worked at the housing authority in Malvern. The Crescent Apartments needed someone willing to work nights. Good pay, they said, though they were fuzzy about why the last 3 caretakers quit. Malvern sits tucked between pine forests and red clay hills, about an hour south of Hot Springs. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your daddy's fishing spots and your mama's maiden name. The Crescent Apartment squats on Elm Street like a brick toad, built in 1962 when integration was still making white folks nervous. 4 stories, 64 units, shaped like a horseshoe around a courtyard where the swimming pool cracked and filled with leaves sometime in the Clinton years. The day I signed my contract, Mrs. Joanna Blackwood, the property manager with steel gray hair and bifocals hanging on a beaded chain, handed me a single key and a folded paper. "This here's your guidelines," she said, smoothing the creases with arthritic fingers. Previous caretakers had difficulties following them. I glanced at the paper. 6 simple rules, handwritten in faded blue ink. What kind of difficulties? She studied me over her bifocals. The kind that make people quit good-paying jobs. That should have been my warning. But rent was due on my trailer, and my truck needed new tires. I took the job. That first evening, I sat in the maintenance office, a converted broom closet on the ground floor, and unfolded Mrs. Blackwood's paper under the desk lamp. The ink had faded to navy blue, and the handwriting belonged to someone who'd learned cursive in Catholic school. Night caretaker protocols. Crescent Apartments. 1. Never acknowledge residents after 11 p.m. unless they speak your name first. They rarely do. 2. If Unit 218 requests maintenance between midnight and 4 a.m., complete the work, but do not look directly at whoever answers the door. 3. The elevator stops on the 5th floor from 2 to 3 a.m. Do not board during this time. Use stairs only. 4. Pool area is off limits after sunset. If you hear splashing, check that the gate remains locked and walk away. 5. Should you encounter Mrs. Evangeline Broussard in the laundry room, she will offer you pralines. Accept them politely, but do not eat them until after sunrise. 6. Between 3 and 4 a.m., the building settles differently. Expect creaking, but if you hear hammering from inside the walls, locate the nearest fire extinguisher and wait until it stops. I read through twice, expecting a punchline that never came. The Crescent only had 4 floors. What 5th floor? And Mrs. Broussard had been dead for 15 years, according to the tenant files. Her obituary was still taped inside the filing cabinet. Evangeline Broussard, 87, beloved baker, and longtime resident. My first week passed quietly. Days, I painted over graffiti and fixed leaky faucets. Tenants nodded politely. Miss Betty Faulkner from 104 always asked about my mama, and old Luther Washington from 312 shared tobacco and stories about working the bauxite mines. Normal people living normal lives. Nights were different. The building breathed differently after dark. Pipes clanged in walls where no pipes ran. Footsteps echoed from empty hallways. The elevator shaft whistled like wind through a cave mouth, even though the motor stayed silent. On my 8th night, I learned about Rule 3. I was mopping the 2nd floor hallway when the elevator chimed. The brass needle above the doors swept past 4 and kept climbing. It stopped at 5 with a soft ding. The doors slid open to reveal darkness deeper than the elevator shaft should allow. A smell drifted out. Wet concrete and something else. Something organic and sweet, like overripe peaches left in the sun. Footsteps emerged from that darkness. Not shoes on carpet, but bare feet on stone. They walked to the threshold and stopped. I couldn't see anything in that black space, but I felt watched, studied, the way a fisherman watches his bobber. The elevator stayed open for exactly 60 seconds. Then the doors closed, and the needle dropped back to 1 like nothing happened. I finished mopping with shaking hands. Rule 5 came next Tuesday. The laundry room sits in the basement, all cinder blocks painted industrial green and machines older than disco. I was fixing a busted dryer door when she appeared. A tiny black woman in a flower print dress, hair pinned neat under a blue kerchief. She looked solid as anyone, except the overhead light passed right through her shadow. "Evening, sugar," she said, voice warm as molasses. "You must be the new caretaker." "Yes, ma'am. Ezra Tillman. Evangeline Broussard. I make pralines every Tuesday." She produced a small paper bag from her apron pocket. The bag looked real enough, and the smell made my stomach growl. Brown sugar, butter, and toasted pecans. "These are for you, honey." A little welcome gift. I accepted them because Mama raised me right. The bag felt warm, and I could hear the pralines shifting inside. "Thank you, Mrs. Broussard. That's mighty kind." She smiled. A genuine smile, not the stretched grimace I'd expected from a ghost. "You eat them tomorrow morning with your coffee. They keep better that way." When I blinked, she was gone. The smell of pecans lingered for another minute, then faded. I tucked the bag in my shirt pocket and didn't eat them until sunrise, just like the rule said. They tasted like paradise and left me energized all morning. By my 3rd week, I'd grown comfortable with the building's rhythms. The elevator's nightly journey to nowhere. Mrs. Broussard's Tuesday visits. The way Unit 139's door sometimes stood ajar after midnight, revealing only darkness no matter how I angled my flashlight. I thought I understood the rules. Thought I could handle whatever weirdness the Crescent threw at me. Then I met what lived in 218. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. The maintenance request slip appeared on my desk Thursday morning, written in pencil on torn notebook paper. Bathroom sink won't drain. Unit 218. Thank you. No signature, no phone number. Just that polite request in handwriting that slanted backward like whoever wrote it was left-handed or hiding something. I checked the tenant registry. Unit 218 stayed empty. Had been since 2019 when the previous tenant moved out citing disturbances. Mrs. Blackwood marked it as uninhabitable due to persistent plumbing issues, though the work orders showed nothing wrong with the pipes. I should have thrown the slip away. Should have figured some kid was pranking the new guy. Instead, I grabbed my pipe snake and headed upstairs that evening around 11:30. The second floor hallway stretched longer than usual in the amber light from the exit signs. My work boots tapped against worn carpet that had seen better decades. Unit 218 sat at the far end, door painted the same beige as every other apartment. Brass numbers slightly crooked where someone had installed them wrong. I knocked twice. Maintenance, hear about the sink. Footsteps approached from inside. Slow, shuffling steps like someone walking in house slippers. The peephole darkened as whoever lived there looked out at me. Then the deadbolt turned with a heavy click. The door opened 6 inches, held by a security chain. Through the gap, I glimpsed a slice of pale forehead and one dark eye that seemed too large for its socket. "You came," said a voice soft as cotton batting. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Got your work order. Mind if I take a look?" The chain rattled free and the door swung wide. The woman standing there looked about 40, maybe 50. Hard to tell in the dim light spilling from the hallway. She wore a faded house dress covered in tiny blue flowers, and her dark hair hung loose past her shoulders. Pretty face, if you overlooked how her skin seemed stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. Her feet were bare, toenails painted crimson. "Thank you for coming so late," she said, stepping aside. "I know it's past visiting hours." I followed her inside, toolbox in hand. The apartment felt cold enough to hang meat in and smelled like wet newspaper and something medicinal, camphor or menthol. My breath came out in small puffs. "Thermostat broken too?" "I run cold," she said, leading me toward the bathroom. "Always have." The living room looked normal except for the furniture, all of it pushed against the walls like someone had cleared space for dancing. The carpet showed indentations where a sofa and coffee table used to sit. Bare walls, no pictures or decorations. The only light came from a single lamp with no shade, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. In the bathroom, I knelt beside the pedestal sink and peered at the drain. Water stood in the basin, murky and still as pond water. I dipped my fingers in to test the temperature. Ice cold, cold enough to sting. "How long has it been backing up?" "Since I moved in." She stood in the doorway, arms folded across her chest. "The water won't go down. It just sits there, waiting." I fed the snake into the drain and cranked the handle. The cable descended smooth at first, then hit resistance about 2 feet down. I worked it back and forth, feeling for the blockage. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to make conversation while I worked. "Helen." She paused, then added, "Helen Dufresne." The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. The snake caught on something solid and wouldn't budge. I cranked harder, putting my shoulder into it. "Been living here long?" Time moves differently for me. That struck me as an odd answer. but tenant small talk often got weird after midnight. I pulled the snake back and examined the cable. No hair, no soap scum, nothing that should cause a blockage. Clean as when I'd started. "Let me try running some water," I said, turning the tap. The faucet coughed once, then clear water poured into the basin. It swirled around the drain and disappeared down the pipe, like gravity had suddenly remembered how to work. Well, I'll be damned. "Language," Helen said, but she was smiling. I packed up my tools and stood. Looks like whatever was stuck came loose. Should drain fine now. "Thank you." She walked me back toward the front door. "I appreciate you coming up here so late. Most people wouldn't. Just doing my job." At the threshold, she touched my arm. Her fingers felt like ice cubes wrapped in silk. "Ezra," she said, and hearing my name from her lips made something cold crawl up my spine. "You're different from the others who worked here. Kinder." I hadn't told her my name. My shirt had no name patch, no identification. Mrs. Blackwood might have mentioned it, but tenants rarely paid attention to maintenance staff names. "Have we met before?" "Not exactly." She tilted her head, studying my face. "But I've been watching you work. You're gentle with things. That's rare." The hallway behind me felt suddenly vast, like I stood at the edge of a cliff. Helen's apartment doorway framed her like a photograph, all shadow and pale skin and eyes that reflected light like water. "I should get going," I said. "Got more rounds to make." "Of course." She stepped back, still smiling that soft smile. "Thank you again, Ezra. Sweet dreams." The door closed with a quiet click, leaving me alone in the hallway. I walked back toward the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the walls. Halfway there, I glanced back. Unit 218's peephole glowed faintly, as if lit from within. Back in my maintenance office, I pulled out the tenant files and searched for Helen Dufresne. Found her 3 folders deep. Tenant deceased, March 15th, 2021. Apparent suicide. Body discovered in Unit 218 bathroom, found in bathtub after neighbors reported water leaking through ceiling. I read the police report twice. Helen Dufresne, 42, had filled her bathtub and opened her wrists with a kitchen knife. The building's water pressure was low that week due to mainline repairs, so the tub took hours to fill. She'd waited in that cold bathroom, bleeding into water that wouldn't drain properly because of a blockage in the pipes. They found her 3 days later when the smell got bad. I folded the report and put it away. Tomorrow I'd ask Mrs. Blackwood about updating the tenant registry. Tonight, I'd finish my rounds and try not to think about ice-cold fingers or the way Helen's voice sounded when she said my name. But first I'd check that Unit 218 stayed locked. Helen started appearing everywhere. Not right away. That would have been too obvious. First came the peripheral sightings. A glimpse of faded floral dress disappearing around corners. The soft pad of bare feet on carpet when I turned my back. Her reflection caught in dark windows, there and gone before I could focus. Friday night, I was replacing a burnt-out bulb in the third-floor stairwell when I heard humming from below. A woman's voice, low and melodic, carrying an old hymn I remembered from childhood church services. Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling. I leaned over the railing and peered down. The second-floor landing sat empty, but the humming continued, echoing off concrete walls. It faded as I listened, like someone walking away down a long corridor. Saturday, she materialized in the laundry room while I was clearing lint from the dryer vents. I turned around, and there she stood, arms full of wet clothes that dripped steadily onto the linoleum. "Hello, Ezra." "Helen." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You doing laundry?" She smiled that gentle smile. "These never seem to get clean." I looked at the clothes she held, a house dress identical to the one she wore, soaked through and stained with something dark. Water pooled at her feet, spreading across the floor in thin rivulets. "Maybe try hot water," I suggested, though talking laundry tips with a dead woman felt surreal even for the Crescent. "I've tried everything." She stepped closer, leaving wet footprints. "Nothing takes out bloodstains once they set." The smell hit me then, not just wet fabric, but something else underneath. Copper pennies and rust, the metallic tang that clings to your sinuses after handling raw meat. I backed toward the door. "I should let you get to your washing." "Stay," she said, and her voice carried a note of longing that made my chest ache. "Please. It gets so lonely down here." "I got rounds to finish." Her face fell, but she nodded. "Of course. You're very dedicated, Ezra. I admire that." When I reached the stairs, I glanced back. Helen stood at the washing machine, feeding her bloody dress into the basin. The water that filled the tub ran crimson, but she kept washing, scrubbing fabric that would never come clean. Sunday brought the pool incident. I was checking the courtyard fence around 10 p.m. when I heard it. The distinct sound of someone doing laps. Clean strokes cutting through water, steady as a metronome. Splash, stroke, splash, stroke. The pool area sat behind a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A padlock the size of my fist secured the gate. I rattled it to make sure, locked tight, same as every night for the past 2 years. But the swimming continued. Regular strokes, back and forth across a pool that held nothing but dead leaves and rainwater. I pulled out my flashlight and aimed it through the fence. The beam caught the pool's cracked concrete bottom, littered with debris and standing water maybe 6 inches deep. Not nearly enough for swimming. Yet the sounds persisted. Splash, stroke, breathe. Splash, stroke, breathe. A shadow moved beneath the shallow water, long and dark, gliding from the deep end toward the diving board. It moved like a person swimming freestyle, arms cutting rhythmically through liquid that couldn't support a body. I followed Rule 4, confirmed the lock, then walked away. But I heard Helen's laughter carrying across the courtyard, bright and happy, the sound of someone who'd found joy in simple exercise. By Monday, the other tenants noticed something was off. "You feeling all right, honey?" Miss Betty asked when I stopped by to fix her kitchen faucet. "You look peaked." Luther Washington cornered me by the mailboxes Tuesday afternoon. "Boy, you got bags under your eyes deeper than strip mining. When's the last time you slept proper?" Truth was, I hadn't slept well since meeting Helen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in that cold apartment, or heard her humming hymns in empty stairwells. Sleep came in brief snatches, interrupted by dreams of drowning in bathtubs that wouldn't drain. Wednesday night, she escalated. I was mopping the first-floor lobby when the elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal Helen standing in the back corner, still wearing that faded house dress, hair hanging loose and damp. "Going up?" she asked. "I'll take the stairs." "Don't be silly. There's plenty of room." The elevator waited, doors open wide. Helen smiled encouragingly, like a mother coaxing a shy child. Her presence filled the small space, not threatening exactly, but overwhelming. The air around her shimmered with cold. "I appreciate the offer, but I need the exercise." Her smile faltered. "You're avoiding me." "Just following protocols." Those rules weren't written for people like us, Ezra. We have an understanding now, a connection. The elevator doors started to close, then jerked open again, as if confused by conflicting commands. Helen remained perfectly still, but her eyes never left mine. "I see you," she said quietly. "The real you. Not the polite maintenance man or the good son who sends money to his mama in Texarkana. I see the part that's lonely, that wants someone to notice when you fix things and make them work again." How did she know about Mama? I'd never mentioned family to anyone at the Crescent. "I need to finish the floor," I said. The elevator doors closed with a soft sigh. Thursday brought disaster. I was replacing a broken window latch in Unit 347 when Mrs. Blackwood called around 8 p.m. Her voice carried the sharp edge of authority, mixed with concern. "Ezra, I need you to check on Helen Dufresne in 218. Her neighbors are complaining about noise." My stomach dropped. "What kind of noise?" "Running water. Been going since this afternoon. Mrs. Chen in 217 says it sounds like Niagara Falls in there." I wanted to tell her about Helen, about the bloody laundry, and the swimming sounds, and the way she knew things she couldn't possibly know. Instead, I said, "I'll take a look. And Ezra? If there's flooding, call emergency maintenance. Water damage in these old buildings spreads fast." The hallway outside 218 sounded like a river rapid. Water rushed behind the door with force that shook the frame. I knocked hard, competing with the noise. "Helen? It's Ezra. Need to check on the water situation." No answer, just the constant roar of liquid flowing where it shouldn't. I used my master key. The door swung open, and water gushed out across my boots. Not the trickle you'd expect from an overflowing sink, but a genuine flood that soaked the hallway carpet in seconds. Helen sat in the bathroom doorway, dress plastered to her skin, hair streaming with water that ran red down her arms. The bathtub overflowed in sheets, pouring across the floor and out the front door. But it wasn't stopping. Water rose from the drain faster than physics allowed, as if the building's entire supply line had ruptured into that one small bathroom. "I can't make it stop," she said, voice barely audible over the rushing water. "It just keeps coming." The tub filled and emptied and filled again in an endless cycle. Water cascaded over the edges, carrying with it the metallic stench of old blood and desperation. "Helen, you need to turn off the tap. There is no tap." She looked up at me, and I saw tears mixing with the water streaming down her face. "There's only this. Forever and forever and forever." The flood reached my ankles, ice cold and tinted pink. In its surface, I caught glimpses of other scenes. Helen filling the tub that last night, waiting in cold water for release that never came, discovering too late that some thirsts can't be quenched and some cycles can't be broken. I reached for the shut-off valve behind the toilet, but Helen's voice stopped me. "Don't." The word carried weight like a physical blow. "Please, Ezra, don't make me go back to being alone." The water reached my shins, cold as January creek water. Helen sat in the bathroom doorway like a broken dam, her entire existence pouring out in an endless flood that would destroy the building if I let it continue. "Helen, I can't—" "You looked at me," she said, cutting me off. "That first night, you looked right at me when you should have turned away. Do you know what that means?" I waded deeper into the apartment, fighting the current. "It means I made a mistake. It means you saw me, really saw me, not as a rule to follow or a problem to solve, but as a person." Her voice cracked like old timber. "Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me and saw Helen instead of just another dead tenant?" The water kept rising, and I could hear Mrs. Chen pounding on the wall from 217. Soon other residents would start complaining. Then Mrs. Blackwood would arrive with emergency crews and awkward questions. People downstairs are going to flood out. Then help me. She reached toward me, fingers pale as fish bellies. Help me break this cycle. How? Stay with me. Talk to me. When someone dies the way I did, the last thing they remember becomes everything. I remember cold water and waiting, and the sound of my life dripping away. But when you're here, I remember other things. Warm kitchens and Sunday dinners and what it felt like to be alive. The floodwater carried debris now, medicine bottles, hair clips, fragments of a life preserved in death. I spotted a small, framed photograph floating past. Helen with a man and young girl, all three smiling at some long-ago picnic. You had a family, David and Emma. She watched the photograph drift toward the front door. Emma would be 23 now. She sends letters sometimes, care of the building management. I watch from the windows when she visits my grave. Helen. I know what you're going to say. That I need to move on. Find peace. Walk toward the light, or whatever consolation people offer the dead. But there is no light, Ezra. There's just this room and this water, and the memory of drowning in my own despair. I reached the bathroom and found the main shut-off valve behind the toilet. One twist clockwise would stop the flood, save the building, restore order. Helen watched me with eyes that held too much hope. If I turn this off, what happens to you? I go back to being alone with my last moments, forever. And if I don't, the water keeps flowing until it finds somewhere else to go. I thought about the other residents, Miss Betty with her arthritis, Luther with his bad heart, families with small children sleeping in apartments below us. The building's electrical system couldn't handle much flooding before something shorted out. There has to be another way. Helen's laugh held no humor. You think I haven't tried? 3 years I've been trapped in this loop, Ezra. 3 years of drowning every night and waking up to drown again. The only time it stops is when someone sees me, really sees me, and remembers that I used to be more than just a cautionary tale about mental health and building maintenance. The photograph had drifted back, caught in a small eddy near my feet. I picked it up, water streaming from the frame. Helen looked so alive in the picture, arms around her daughter, face bright with genuine joy. Tell me about them, David and Emma. For a moment, the rushing water softened to a gentle flow. Helen's shoulders relaxed, and some color returned to her cheeks. David taught high school biology. Terrible at home repairs, but made the best pancakes in Garland County. Emma inherited his sweet tooth and my stubborn streak. She wanted to be a veterinarian. Helen smiled, and the temperature in the room seemed to rise a few degrees. They tried to help when the depression got bad. Doctors, medications, therapy. But some hurts go deeper than medicine can reach. What happened? David got a job offer in Memphis. Better pay, better school district for Emma. They wanted me to come with them, start fresh somewhere new. The water began rising again as Helen's voice grew distant. But I'd lived in this apartment for 12 years. It was the only place that felt like home after my mother died. I couldn't imagine leaving. So you stayed. So they left without me. And I realized too late that home isn't a place. It's people who love you enough to stick around even when you're difficult. The flooding intensified, carrying larger objects now. A bathroom scale bumped against my leg, followed by a hairbrush and several plastic bottles. If I didn't act soon, water would reach the electrical outlets. Helen, I want to help you, but I can't let you destroy the building. I know. She reached into the rushing water and pulled out something small and silver, a kitchen knife with a wooden handle, the blade still stained despite 3 years of endless washing. This is what I used, what I thought would solve everything. My stomach twisted. Put that away. I can't. It's part of the loop, part of what keeps me here. Every night I pick it up, and every night I make the same choice, and every morning I wake up to make it again. She held the knife out to me, handle first. Unless someone else makes a different choice. What are you asking me to do? Take it. Break the cycle by choosing something different. I stared at the blade, water swirling around us both. Taking it felt like accepting responsibility for Helen's death, becoming complicit in her endless tragedy. But leaving it meant condemning her to replay her worst moment for eternity. If I take it, does the flooding stop? I don't know. But it changes the pattern. Instead of dying alone, I'd be handing my burden to someone who cared enough to listen. The water reached my waist now, and I could hear voices in the hallway. Other tenants evacuating their apartments. Soon, Mrs. Blackwood would arrive with maintenance crews and police, and explaining the situation would be career-ending at best. I reached for the knife. The moment my fingers touched the handle, everything stopped. The rushing water, the overflow, even the sound of rain against windows. Helen's apartment fell silent as a held breath. "Thank you," she whispered. The knife felt warm in my hand, lighter than I'd expected. As I gripped it, images flooded my mind. Not Helen's memories, but my own. Every time I'd felt trapped by circumstances, every moment I'd chosen duty over happiness. Every night I'd gone to bed alone in my trailer, wondering if this was all life had to offer. "I understand now," I said. "Why you couldn't leave." Helen nodded, her form already growing translucent around the edges. Sometimes staying in hell feels safer than risking heaven. She faded like morning mist, leaving only the knife and the receding water. The apartment returned to normal. Dry carpet, empty bathtub, silence broken only by my own breathing. I took the knife into my toolbox and walked toward the door, boots squelching on damp carpet. In the hallway, confused neighbors emerged from their apartments, pointing at water stains that were already fading. "False alarm," I called out. "Pipe burst got itself sorted." Mrs. Chen from 217 frowned at the bone-dry carpet, but I heard rushing water for hours. "Old building acoustics," I said. "Sound carries funny sometimes." As I headed for the stairs, I felt eyes watching from 218's peephole. But when I looked back, the lens stayed dark and empty, holding no trace of the woman who'd been drowning there for 3 years. The knife grew heavier in my toolbox with each step. The knife changed everything. Not right away. That would have been too obvious. Too much like the horror movies where touching cursed objects brings instant doom. Helen's knife worked more subtly, seeping into my thoughts like water through concrete. Slow, but persistent. First came the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself in Helen's bathroom, watching her fill that tub with hands that shook from more than cold. I'd try to speak, to warn her, but dream logic kept me silent. She'd look up at me with eyes full of apologies and slide the blade across her wrists like she was opening an envelope. The water would turn crimson, and I'd wake up with the taste of copper in my mouth. By Friday, the dreams bled into waking hours. I'd catch myself staring at the knife during routine maintenance calls, running my thumb along the handle until the wood grew warm. It whispered sometimes, not Helen's voice, but something older, hungrier. It told me about the loneliness that lived in every apartment, the quiet desperation of people paying rent to exist in boxes barely large enough for their broken dreams. the other rules started breaking down. Thursday night, Mrs. Broussard didn't appear in the laundry room. I waited until past 11, but the basement stayed empty except for the sound of washing machines grinding through their cycles. Her absence felt wrong, like a missed heartbeat. Friday, the elevator made its nightly journey to the phantom 5th floor, but when the doors opened, I heard crying from inside that dark space. A child's voice, thin and scared, calling for its mama. The sound pulled at something deep in my chest, made me want to step into that blackness and offer comfort. I didn't, but the wanting scared me. Saturday brought the pool incident that made me understand how badly I disrupted the building's balance. I was checking the courtyard fence around 10:30 when I heard splashing. Not the rhythmic swimming I'd grown accustomed to, but violent thrashing like someone drowning. The sounds carried panic, desperation, the kind of struggle that ends badly. The gate's padlock hung open, chain wrapped around the fence post, like someone had unlocked it and walked away. Inside the enclosure, the pool held water now. Black water that reflected nothing, deep enough to swallow a person whole. Something moved beneath the surface. Not Helen's graceful swimming, but frantic kicking, arms flailing against liquid that seemed thick as motor oil. A pale hand broke the surface, fingers splayed wide, grasping for air that stayed just out of reach. I should have followed Rule 4, should have locked the gate and walked away. Instead, I climbed the fence. The water felt solid under my boots, supporting my weight like I was walking on glass. Each step sent ripples across the surface, and the thrashing grew more desperate. Whoever was down there could see me, was reaching for help that might actually come. I knelt at the pool's edge and plunged my hand into that dark water. It felt warm, body temperature warm, and something immediately grabbed my wrist with fingers that dug deep enough to bruise. I pulled back hard, lifting against weight that shouldn't exist. Helen's head broke the surface, hair plastered flat, eyes wide with terror that had nothing to do with being dead. "I can't get out," she gasped, water streaming from her mouth. "It won't let me go." She looked different now, younger, more solid, as if my taking the knife had given her substance she'd lost. But the pool held her tight, the dark water reaching up her neck like grasping hands. "Helen, you're supposed to be gone. I helped you break the cycle. You broke one cycle and started another." She clung to my arm, nails drawing blood. "The knife doesn't end things, Ezra. It just transfers them. Now I'm drowning in your guilt instead of my own." The water began pulling her down again, and I realized the pool wasn't trying to drown Helen. It was trying to drown the part of me that had taken responsibility for her death. Every doubt I'd harbored since Wednesday night, every moment I'd wondered if I should have just turned off the water and let her fade, had gathered here in this black water that reflected my own face. "Let me go," Helen said, and I didn't know if she meant my grip on her arm or something deeper. I released her hand. She sank without a sound, leaving only ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. When they reached the pool's edge, the water drained away completely, leaving dry concrete and scattered leaves. The padlock hung open on the gate, swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. Sunday morning brought Mrs. Blackwood to my office, her face stern as a school principal's. "Ezra, I've had complaints about your work quality." I looked up from the maintenance log where I'd been pretending to write coherent entries. The words kept swimming on the page, rearranging themselves into Helen's final message. "Help me, help me, help me." "What kind of complaints?" "Mrs. Chen says you fixed her faucet Tuesday, but it's been leaking worse than before. Luther Washington claims you painted over his apartment number, and now his mail gets delivered to 314 instead of 312. She consulted a small notebook. Miss Betty found her kitchen cabinet doors hanging open after you left, like someone had been searching through her things. I had no memory of doing any of that. The past week felt wrapped in fog, events blurring together like watercolors in rain. I can go back and fix those issues. That's not the point. Mrs. Blackwood sat down across from my desk, her expression softening slightly. You look terrible, honey. When's the last time you went home? Really went home. Not just that little cot you set up in the storage room. I've been sleeping at the Crescent all week, afraid to leave Helen's knife unattended. It called to me even now, from the locked toolbox under my desk, a weight that pulled at my thoughts. The building needs constant attention. The building needs a caretaker who isn't falling apart. She leaned forward, studying my face. You've got the look, Ezra. Same look the other caretakers got before they quit. Haunted, guilty about something. I'm just tired. Are you following the rules I gave you? The question hung in the air like smoke. How could I explain that following one rule had broken all the others? That helping Helen had created a chain reaction that turned the Crescent's careful, supernatural balance into chaos? I try to. Trying isn't good enough. Mrs. Blackwood stood, smoothing her skirt. Those rules exist for a reason. They're not suggestions or guidelines. They're the only things keeping this building from tearing itself apart. After she left, I sat alone with my thoughts and Helen's knife. The blade seemed heavier now, weighted with consequences I hadn't foreseen. Every time I'd tried to help someone, I'd made things worse. Helen was still drowning, just in different water. The building's other residents were suffering from my distracted maintenance, and whatever lived on the phantom 5th floor was crying for its mama because I'd disrupted the natural order. That afternoon, I walked through the building, taking inventory of the damage my good intentions had caused. Mrs. Chen's faucet dripped steadily, each drop echoing like a countdown. Luther's apartment number had been painted over with something that looked like dried blood. Miss Betty's kitchen showed signs of searching, not by me, but by something else. Something that had used my nocturnal visits as cover for its own activities. The Crescent was sick, and I was the infection. Around sunset, I made a decision. If taking Helen's burden had poisoned the building's supernatural ecosystem, maybe returning it would restore balance. The knife had transferred her cycle of despair to me, but cycles could be broken. Helen had taught me that much. I just had to figure out how to break this one without destroying myself in the process. The elevator chimed softly, and I looked up to see the brass needle climbing past 4, toward that impossible 5th floor, where something cried in the darkness. Tonight, I was going to find out what lived up there. Tonight, I was going to fix what I'd broken, even if it meant joining the Crescent's collection of damaged souls. The knife grew warm in my toolbox, eager for whatever came next. At 1:47 a.m., I stood before the elevator with Helen's knife tucked in my belt and a fire extinguisher under my arm. Rule 6 said to find the nearest extinguisher when hearing hammering in the walls, but tonight I planned to carry mine to the source. The elevator doors opened at my touch, revealing brass buttons for floors 1 through 4. But as I stepped inside, a 5th button materialized below the others, tarnished copper instead of brass, etched with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Not letters or numbers, but something older, like marks carved into cave walls by people who had no words for what they'd seen. I pressed the button. The elevator lurched upward past the 4th floor, cables singing tension that shouldn't exist. Through the gap between doors and frame, I glimpsed hallways that stretched beyond the building's actual dimensions, lit by light sources that cast no visible shadows. The smell of wet concrete and something sweet, overripe fruit, seeped through the ventilation. When the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway identical to the others, except for the carpet. Instead of worn brown industrial grade, deep red piles stretched in both directions, thick enough to muffle footsteps. The walls showed water damage, dark stains that spread like bruises, and in several places, the drywall had buckled outward as if something pressed against it from behind. Apartment doors lined both sides, numbered in that same tarnished copper. 501, 502, 503. But the numbers kept changing when I wasn't looking directly at them. 501 became 218, then shifted to 147, then back to 501. The building was showing me what it remembered, overlaying past and present like double-exposed photographs. The crying came from 518 at the far end of the hall. I walked carefully, fire extinguisher ready, Helen's knife warm against my hip. The carpet felt soft underfoot but made wet sounds, like walking across moss-covered stone. With each step, the water stains on the walls grew larger, darker, until they resembled crude murals depicting scenes I recognized. Helen in her bathtub, Mrs. Broussard baking pralines in a kitchen that existed 40 years ago, a young boy drowning in the courtyard pool sometime in the 1970s. The building remembered its tragedies, collected them like pressed flowers in a book. 518's door stood ajar, warm yellow light spilling into the crimson hallway. I knocked twice. Hello? Maintenance. The crying stopped. Small footsteps approached, bare feet on hardwood floors, and the door swung wider. A boy of maybe 8 years old peered up at me, wearing swim trunks and a Little League baseball shirt. Water dripped from his dark hair, pooling at his feet. His skin had the blue-white pallor of drowning victims, but his eyes were bright and alert. "Are you here to fix the pipes?" he asked. "They've been making noise for a real long time." "What's your name, son?" "Tommy Guidry. I live here with my mom, but she went to the store and told me not to answer the door for strangers." He chewed his lower lip. "But you're not really a stranger, are you?" "I've seen you working in the building." Tommy Guidry. I'd seen that name in the old incident reports Mrs. Blackwood kept filed in the back of her desk drawer. July 1973. 8-year-old boy found in courtyard pool. Apparent accidental drowning while mother was at work. "Where's all this water coming from, Tommy?" He stepped aside, revealing an apartment that shouldn't exist. The layout matched the others: living room, kitchen, bedroom, bath. But water covered everything, not flooding like Helen's place, but a thin layer that never dried, reflecting the ceiling lights like an indoor lake. Furniture sat submerged, a sofa with cushions that floated just beneath the surface, a coffee table draped in water weeds, a television playing some long-canceled game show to an audience of minnows. It started when the lady downstairs got sad, Tommy explained, leading me through ankle-deep water toward the bathroom. The water couldn't drain right because she was holding onto it too tight. Now it's everywhere, and I can't find the way back to the pool. Helen's endless cycle of drowning and refilling had backed up through the building's spiritual plumbing, creating this reservoir of accumulated despair. Tommy was caught in the overflow, displaced from his own death by trauma that didn't belong to him. "Tommy, do you remember what happened to you?" I was swimming. Mom said not to go in the deep end, but I was a good swimmer. Won second place at the community center that summer. His voice carried pride mixed with confusion. Something grabbed my ankle, pulled me down where the drain was. I tried to swim up, but the water was too thick, like swimming through honey. We reached the bathroom, where the source of the problem became clear. The bathtub overflowed constantly, but instead of Helen's bloody water, this tub produced something worse: liquid grief, distilled sorrow that poured from faucets and drains throughout the building. Every tear shed in the Crescent for the past 50 years had gathered here, creating a spring of concentrated anguish that fed the supernatural ecosystem. "Can you make it stop?" Tommy asked. "I've been waiting so long to go home." I knelt beside the tub and saw my reflection in its surface, drawn, exhausted, carrying burdens that weren't mine to bear. Helen's knife felt heavy at my side, eager to cut more connections, transfer more pain from one soul to another. But that was the problem. The knife didn't solve anything. It just moved suffering around like water seeking its level. Tommy was drowning in Helen's despair. Helen had drowned in her own isolation, and I was drowning in the guilt of trying to fix things I didn't understand. "Tommy, what if I told you that helping sometimes means letting go? Like when you throw someone a rope and they won't grab it. Something like that." I pulled Helen's knife from my belt. The blade reflected the bathroom's aqueous light, casting ripples on the walls. This belonged to the sad lady downstairs. She gave it to me because she thought it would help her, but all it did was pass her hurt to someone else. "Are you going to give it to me?" "No, son. I'm going to give it back to the building." I raised the knife above the overflowing tub. The blade seemed to grow heavier, fighting against my intention. Helen's voice whispered from the water, "Don't leave me alone again." But she wasn't alone. She never had been. The Crescent was full of lost souls, each carrying their own portion of sorrow, each part of a larger community of the displaced and forgotten. Trying to save one by burdening another only perpetuated the cycle. I dropped the knife into the tub. The water swallowed it, with a sound like a sigh of relief. For a moment, everything went still. The overflow stopped. Tommy's breathing became quiet. Even my own heartbeat seemed to pause. Then the tub began to drain, the water level dropping steadily as whatever pressure had been building finally found release. Tommy's reflection in the receding water grew fainter, more translucent. "Is it over?" he asked. "For you, yeah. You can go home now." "What about the sad lady?" I watched the last of the water spiral down the drain, carrying with it the knife and the accumulated grief of decades. "She'll find her own way. They all will." Tommy smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen in the Crescent since starting this job. He waved goodbye and faded like mist, leaving only wet footprints that evaporated as I watched. The apartment around me began to change, walls becoming less solid, furniture dissolving into memory. The 5th floor was collapsing back into whatever space existed between floors, taking its reservoir of collected sorrow with it. I ran for the elevator as the hallway shortened behind me, doors blinking out of existence like blown candles. The red carpet turned gray, then disappeared entirely, leaving only concrete that cracked and crumbled as the building reclaimed its proper dimensions. The elevator doors closed just as 518 winked out of reality, and I felt the car descend past floors that settled back into their intended configuration. When the doors opened on the 1st floor, everything looked normal. Worn brown carpet, water-stained walls, the familiar smell of old building and industrial cleaner. But something had changed. The air felt lighter, less oppressed by accumulated tragedy. The rules hadn't disappeared, but they'd returned to their proper balance, no longer straining against disruptions caused by my well-meaning interference. I walked to my office and sat down at the desk, suddenly exhausted. Helen's knife was gone, taking with it the weight of choices I'd made for all the wrong reasons. Outside my window, the courtyard pool sat empty and quiet, no longer disturbed by phantom swimmers or childhood memories. The Crescent had healed itself, the way old buildings do when people stop trying to fix what isn't really broken. The first thing I noticed was the quiet, not silence. The Crescent had never been silent, what with pipes settling and old wood creaking and the constant hum of electrical systems older than disco, but the restless energy that had pulsed through the walls like a fever had broken. The building breathed easier now, settled into rhythms that felt natural instead of forced. Tuesday morning brought Mrs. Blackwood for her weekly inspection. She walked through the lobbies and hallways with her clipboard, checking off items with brisk efficiency. When she reached my office, her expression had softened considerably. "Much better," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Whatever you did over the weekend, it worked. Just followed the rules. Did you now?" She studied me with eyes that missed nothing. "Because the last 3 caretakers said the same thing, right up until they stopped following them at all." I thought about Helen's knife resting somewhere in the building's spiritual depths, about Tommy Guidry finding his way home, about the choice between helping individuals and preserving the larger balance. The rules haven't changed, but my understanding of them had evolved. I learned the difference between following rules and understanding why they exist. Mrs. Blackwood nodded approvingly. "Good. Because this building has been collecting stories for 60 years, and every story needs its proper place. When you start moving them around, trying to rewrite the endings, everything gets tangled up." That afternoon, I encountered Mrs. Broussard in the laundry room. She stood at the folding table, creasing towels with military precision, wearing her familiar flower print dress and blue kerchief. "Afternoon, Ezra. You look better." "Thank you, ma'am. How are the pralines coming along?" "Oh, I gave up baking for a while. Ingredients weren't mixing right. Too much bitterness, not enough sweetness. But things are settling back to normal now." She handed me a small paper bag, still warm. "These should taste like they're supposed to." I accepted the bag gratefully. "Mrs. Broussard, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey." "How long have you been taking care of folks here?" She considered the question while folding a fitted sheet, a task that seemed much easier for someone not bound by conventional physics. "Time moves differently when you're between places, but I've been watching over residents since before you were born. This building collects people who need watching over, living and dead alike. Is that why the rules exist? To keep everyone in their proper place?" "The rules exist to maintain balance. Living folks need their space to grieve and grow and make mistakes. Dead folks need their space to process what happened and decide what comes next. When those spaces overlap too much, nobody finds peace." I bit into one of her pralines. It tasted perfect, sweet, nutty, with just enough salt to enhance the flavors. Real food made by someone who cared about the result. "What if someone's stuck between spaces?" "Then they need help finding where they belong." But help means guidance, not interference. You can show someone the door, but you can't walk through it for them. That evening I made my rounds with new eyes. The building's supernatural residents were still there, but they'd returned to their proper rhythms. The elevator made its nightly journey to the phantom 5th floor, but the doors stayed closed now, containing whatever needed containing. The pool area remained locked after sunset, though I sometimes heard gentle swimming sounds, not the frantic splashing of someone drowning, but the peaceful lapse of someone who'd found their element. Unit 218 stayed quiet. I paused outside during my midnight rounds, pressing my ear to the door. No sound of running water, no whispered invitations, no condensation fogging the peephole. Helen had found her peace, whatever form that took, but she'd left something behind. Thursday night, I discovered a maintenance request slipped under my office door. Bathroom mirror needs cleaning. Thank you. No signature, no apartment number, but the handwriting looked familiar. I checked my supplies and found a bottle of glass cleaner I didn't remember purchasing, along with a note in Helen's backward slanting script. Some reflections need clearing away. I carried the cleaner through the building, testing it on mirrors and empty apartments scheduled for renovation. Each surface I touched revealed scenes from the past, previous tenants, moments of joy and sorrow, the accumulated history of people who'd lived and died within these walls. But instead of trapping those memories like frost on glass, the cleaner let them fade naturally, leaving surfaces that reflected the present instead of the past. By Friday, even the living residents noticed the change. Building feels different, Luther Washington mentioned when I stopped by to fix his kitchen sink. Lighter somehow. Been sleeping better. Miss Betty agreed when I encountered her collecting mail. My arthritis isn't acting up near as much. Whatever pressure was building in the walls seems to have eased. Mrs. Chen from 217 cornered me in the lobby Saturday morning. Did you do something about the noise from 218? It's been quiet all week. First good sleep I've had in months. I just smiled and told them I'd addressed some plumbing issues. The truth was more complex. The building's supernatural ecosystem had rebalanced itself, but not by removing the ghosts or denying their existence. Instead, each spirit had found its proper niche. Mrs. Broussard in the laundry room, offering comfort through food and kindness. Tommy Guidry presumably returned to whatever playground existed beyond life. Helen released from her cycle of despair to face whatever came next. The rules remained, but they felt different now, less like arbitrary restrictions and more like guidelines for coexistence. Don't acknowledge residents after 11 p.m. unless they speak first, because some interactions require invitation rather than assumption. Complete maintenance requests from 218 without looking directly at the requester, because some help works better when offered without judgment or expectation. Sunday evening brought an unexpected visitor. I was updating my maintenance logs when someone knocked on my office door. I opened it to find a young woman in her early 20s, dark hair and sad eyes that reminded me of someone. "Mr. Tillman, I'm Emma Dufresne. I think you knew my mother." My stomach tightened. Helen's daughter, the veterinary student from the photographs. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She entered hesitantly, glancing around the small office with its desk, filing cabinets, and cot in the corner. I know this sounds strange, but I've been having dreams about her. Good dreams, for the first time since she died. She looks peaceful, like she's finally found some kind of resolution. I'm glad to hear that. The thing is, in these dreams, she keeps mentioning a maintenance man who listened to her stories. Someone who helped her remember that home isn't a place. It's people who care about you. Emma pulled a small wrapped package from her purse. She wanted me to give you this. Inside the package, I found a recipe card written in Helen's careful script, Evangeline Broussard's famous pralines. At the bottom, a note. For Ezra, who understands that sometimes the best help is knowing when to let go. Thank you for listening. She also wanted me to tell you something, Emma said, that she's not alone anymore. There's a whole community where she is now, people who understand what it means to carry too much weight for too long. She's learning to set some of it down. After Emma left, I sat in my office holding Helen's final gift. The recipe card felt warm, infused with the same comfort I'd found in Mrs. Broussard's baking. Around me, the Crescent settled into its evening rhythms. Pipes cooling, wood contracting. The soft sounds of people preparing for sleep in apartments that held both the living and the dead in careful balance. I'd learned something important about the rules, about helping, about the difference between interference and compassion. The building would always collect stories, gather the lost and broken and displaced. My job wasn't to fix them or relocate them or take their burdens upon myself. My job was to maintain the space where they could exist safely while they figured out their own paths to peace. The new caretaker started last Tuesday. I watched him from my office window as Mrs. Blackwood walked him around the property, pointing out the pool gate, the elevator, the various apartments that required special attention. Kevin Rousseau, fresh out of trade school, eager to prove himself in his first real maintenance job. He carried his tools like talismans and asked earnest questions about work schedules and tenant relations. Mrs. Blackwood had offered me the day supervisor position when old Franklin Thibodeau retired. Better hours, better pay, a chance to work normal shifts where the most supernatural thing I'd encounter would be Mrs. Chen's complaints about her neighbor's cooking smells. I'd turned it down. "You sure about staying nights?" she'd asked. Most folks would jump at the chance to work days. The building needs someone who understands the evening routine. She'd studied me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. And you understand it now. I understand my part in it. That evening, I gave Kevin the same tour I'd received, ending at the maintenance office with the folded paper Mrs. Blackwood had handed me on my first day. The rules, written in faded blue ink, by someone who'd learned them through experience rather than instruction. 6 simple guidelines, I said, watching Kevin read through them twice. Follow these, and you'll do fine. What if I have questions? Ask. But remember, the rules exist to maintain balance, not to make your job easier. Sometimes following them will feel counterintuitive. Kevin nodded, the earnest nod of someone who thought he understood but hadn't been tested yet. I remembered that nod. What happened to the last guy? He learned what I learned, that trying to fix everyone's problems usually creates bigger problems. This building has its own ecosystem. Our job is to maintain it, not redesign it. After Kevin left to start his first shift, I made my own rounds. The building felt stable, settled into rhythms that accommodated both the living and the dead. Mrs. Broussard waved from the laundry room, arms full of fresh towels that smelled like lavender and care. The elevator made its nightly journey to the phantom 5th floor, doors opening and closing on schedule, containing whatever needed containing. In Unit 218, I paused and listened. Silence, but not the heavy silence of despair. The peaceful quiet of someone who'd found rest. My rounds took me past residents preparing for sleep, Luther Washington's television providing gentle background noise, Miss Betty's reading lamp casting warm light through her window, families tucking children into beds in apartments that had seen generations of similar scenes. The living and the dead, each in their proper spaces, each part of the larger story the Crescent continued to tell. Near dawn, I returned to my office to find a maintenance request waiting on the desk. Light switch and utility closet sticks. Needs adjusting. No signature, no apartment number, but I recognized the backward slanting handwriting. I collected my tools and headed for the basement utility closet, a cramped space filled with circuit breakers and water shutoffs. The light switch worked fine, but behind it, someone had tucked a small piece of paper into the electrical box. Thank you for learning the difference. H. I folded the note and put it in my shirt pocket, next to Mrs. Broussard's latest praline recipe and Kevin's list of questions about the building's quirks. Tomorrow, I'd start teaching the new guy what I'd learned, that maintenance meant more than fixing broken things, that some problems solve themselves when given proper space, and that the best help often came from knowing when not to help at all. Outside my office window, sunrise painted the courtyard in shades of gold and amber. The Crescent Apartments settled into another day, its stories continuing, its balance maintained by people who understood that some places need caretakers, not heroes. I made coffee and settled in to write my final entry in the night shift log. Building secure. All systems functioning within normal parameters. Ready for day shift.